Properly jack up vehicle at designated lift points. Remove wheels with a 21 mm socket. Open the hood and remove the 2 plastic trim pieces above the suspension tower. Start removing the windshield wiper cowl by first pushing down on the plastic fasteners with a small screwdriver. Mark the location of the windshield wiper on the windshield using tape. This will ensure you reinstall them correctly after completing the suspension installation. Remove the trim cover from the windshield wiper arm. Use a 14 mm socket to remove the nut, then take off the windshield wipers. You may need to wiggle the arm to loosen it. Next, carefully pull and remove windshield wiper cowl. Next, move to the wheel well and use a 14 mm and 10 mm socket to remove the wheel sensor and brake line bracket. Use a 17 mm socket to remove the end link. Use a 22 mm socket and wrench to remove the lower mount bolts. Remove the 3 14 mm top hat nuts, then take out the strut. Adjust the coilover height by loosening the lower mount perch and spinning the lower mount to achieve the desired height. Do not adjust the height using the spring perches, as these are intended to adjust spring preload. Position the coilover into place and hand tighten the top hat nuts using a 14 mm socket. Raise the spindle to align with the lower mount and insert the 22 mm bolts. Torque the 2 22 mm lower control arm nuts to 177 pound-feet. Torque the 17 mm nuts on the end link to 55 pound-feet. Install the brake line and wheel sensor using a 10 mm and 14 mm socket and torque them to 11 pound-feet. Torque the 14 mm top hat nuts to 29 pound-feet. Use a spanner wrench to tighten the lower mount perch, then strike the end of the spanner wrench with a mallet to lock the lower mount in place. Install the wheels and torque the lug nuts to 76 pound-feet. Reinstall the windshield wiper cowl and the windshield wipers. This concludes the front installation. To begin the rear coilover installation for the Corolla IM, start by removing the rear wheel using a 21 mm socket. Next, remove the 14 mm end link nut. Support the lower mount with a jack and remove the 2 17 mm nuts and bolts. Push down on the spindle to slide the spindle bolt out. Use an 8 mm hex key and a 19 mm wrench to remove the shock top mount nut, then take out the shock. Press down on the lower control arm to remove the spring. Remove the top hat bushing and washer from the OEM shock and transfer them to the new shock. Remove the washer and screw from the bottom of the new spring. Measure the height of the old spring, then determine the desired height for the new spring. The spring height will determine the rear ride height. Remove the washer and screw from the bottom of the new spring, then place the spring into position. Place the shock into position and tighten the top hat nut with a 19 mm socket to 35 pound-feet. Use a jack to compress the lower mount until the spindle's mounting hole aligns, then insert the bolt. Twist the lower mount down until the mounting hole aligns, then slide in the bolt. Torque the two 17mm lower mount nuts to 100 pound-feet. Torque the 14mm end link nut to 65 pound-feet. Install the washer and screw onto the spring using an 8mm hex key. Screw on the rear damper knobs. Finally, install the wheels and torque the lug nuts to 76 pound-feet. This completes the Toyota Corolla IM coilover installation. We recommend performing an alignment 1 week after installation to allow time for the suspension to settle.